In 2019, I posted a video on Christmas Eve suggesting that people skip out on the blockbusters that were coming out at that time. I mean, Cats? Jumanji: The Next Level? Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker? Really? Those were some slim pickings. Fast forward to Christmas 2020 though, and similarly, there were somewhat limited choices for new movies to watch around the holidays, but the situation was much different this time around. The COVID-19 pandemic already had severely impacted the film industry, specifically the theater side of things, so any theatrical release would be seen as a financial sacrifice on the part of the distributor considering the much lower theater attendance. Christmas was seen as an opportunity to bring hope for theaters though, and some decent films were scheduled for the holiday season on top of some significant streaming releases. For this video, I would like to share some very brief thoughts on several of these movies, which include the following: Wonder Woman 1984, Soul, Monster Hunter, News of the World, Promising Young Woman, and Greenland! I will just spend a couple of minutes tops on each of these films, and I will discuss them in the order of worst to best, at least in my opinion. Shall we get started? First, we have what will most likely shock most of the people watching this video, in which I think Wonder Woman 1984 was actually the worst of the bunch. Now look, is this the lowest quality production of the ones I'm going to discuss in this video? No, I would argue that the one I will talk about next is objectively worse. In fact, while watching Wonder Woman 1984, there are a number of instances when you can tell that the money thrown at Patty Jenkins and her crew went places. This is particularly the case with the opening scene of the film set during what feels like an Olympian obstacle course set in Themyscira. Plus, Hans Zimmer's music is always good, so the film had that going for it as well. However, the reason why I claim Wonder Woman 1984 as the worst of the films mentioned in this video is that sometimes I am more bothered by a movie that is boring or dissatisfying with its storytelling, rather than just being straight up bad. Wasted potential is something that I weigh a bit more heavily when it comes to sharing my opinion on a piece of media, and this is absolutely the case with the lone superhero film we got in 2020. It had a lot of promise that was ultimately squandered in the final product. I wish that I had the opportunity to speak more in depth about my issues with the movie because, in order for me to be more thorough, I would have to spoil a lot of elements of the story, and I don't want to disrespect anyone who hasn't had a chance to see it yet. But I hope it would be enough for me to say that I just did not buy into the central storyline. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a reason why the marketing material completely shies away from what this movie is really about. The messy, bloated plot is honestly laughable when thought about in hindsight. Certain things about character motivations are believable on a surface level, but the ramifications of what take place because of a certain MacGuffin that gets exploited by the main characters were too over the top and silly for me to get invested. On top of that, the movie is boring, tedious, and surprisingly devoid of emotion. For a superhero film that is so keen to recapture the essence of Richard Donner's Superman films, its earnestness comes to the film's detriment, since it never matches its intended tone with consistently visually appealing shots, exciting action, or character interactions one can get invested in. Even the dynamic between Diana and Steve Trevor, the one relationship you would think would anchor the movie in emotion, felt off. I wish I could tell you why, but again, that would spoil things. The one thing I can agree on with pretty much everyone else on, both those who liked and disliked the movie mind you, is that Pedro Pascal was really good. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm on a high from The Mandalorian. He is genuinely the best aspect of what is otherwise a bad movie. The writing for his character may have been a bit inconsistent and wacky, but Pascal himself was always operating on a level where you could have genuine investment in what he's doing on screen. If only his character's role in the story wasn't so weird and undercooked. I know there are a number of viewers who will be upset by what I've had to say about Wonder Woman 1984, especially since many of them had been hoping that this superhero film would be able to bring joy in a year that hadn't really been that joyful to go through. But unfortunately, it did not work for me at all, and if you were considering subscribing to HBO Max to safely watch it at home, I would suggest finding different reasons to subscribe to the service. I give Wonder Woman 1984 a D+. Next up, we have Monster Hunter. You may be shocked that I put Monster Hunter right above Wonder Woman 1984. It's an adaptation of a video game written and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, who has been known to botch other video game franchises in the past. Based on the filmmaker's, pedigree, so to speak, it might be hard to believe that his film is better than the sequel to Wonder Woman. And to be honest, it really isn't. But hear me out on why I like it more. With Wonder Woman 1984, the goals of the film were lofty, and thus the weight of its missed opportunities hit harder. As far as Monster Hunter goes, it's adapting a video game where literally the only objective is to run around, kill monsters, obtain loot, and then keep on killing monsters. Take that description with a grain of salt because I have a copy of Monster Hunter World on my shelf that I still haven't played, but I would like to think that fans of the franchise would agree that the concept isn't that hard to comprehend. Due to the context behind this production, I walked into the experience not expecting to be surprised, and lo and behold, I pretty much got exactly what I was expecting. That being said, what I did get certainly wasn't good. There's no sense getting into the screenwriting because there is nothing I could comment on that would be meaningful discourse. For the aspect that mattered the most towards the film's success though, which concerns the action scenes, I still felt some disappointment in that the quality of these sequences was inconsistent. Some of them were fun in a guilty, over-the-top ridiculous sort of way, while at other times the action scenes were muddled by overly flashy images and hyperactive editing. More often than not though, I found myself having mind-numbing fun with what I was watching, and at least the action was more fun and in greater supply than the minimal and very underwhelming action of Wonder Woman 1984. The film may be a grand example of general incompetence when it comes to storytelling, visual effects, and editing, but at least it provided more fun for me than the previous movie did, and moreover, it's almost an hour shorter. When picking between two bad movies, I would rather choose the one that uses much less of my time. It's still not recommended nonetheless though. I also give Monster Hunter a D+. And next we have Greenland. When the trailers for this movie first debuted, I was unsure what to really think about it. After all, I can't recall a disaster movie ever being included among the canon of great films. At best, they are normally something made to provide limited, nonsensical fun. That's initially what I'd expected of Greenland as well, in which the concept is centered around a family led by Gerard Butler, who are hoping to seek shelter when the world receives the disturbing news that a comet will strike Earth within a couple of days, signaling the end of mankind with a devastating extinction-level event. Due to the talent involved and the lower budget, I was thinking this would be like a diet version of Deep Impact or 2012, but surprisingly, this film not only takes itself more seriously than most disaster films, it also successfully manages to balance that darker tone with satisfying mid-budget thrills. Other reviews I have read or watched have touched on what I am about to say, but I'll reiterate that Greenland makes all of that work by keeping its focus on characters. Similar films will feature poorly written archetypal characters that are simply vessels for the plot to move forward, and to be someone we can superficially root for when the going gets tough. That's not so much the case here, for the main characters have well-developed personalities, motivations, and emotional baggage that make a difference throughout the film's runtime. Even though the film runs through familiar beats and how the characters progress, I still genuinely wanted this family to not only survive through this disaster, but also work out their relationship issues as well. It helps that all of the actors gave convincing performances, particularly Gerard Butler in one of the better roles he's had in recent memory. Despite how much this film surprises on a character level though, it still has its fair share of weaknesses in terms of plot development and visual effects. Oftentimes when visual effects shots are shown on screen, they aren't relied on heavily, but you can easily tell that the CGI looks as though it belongs in a movie from 2004. On top of that, the story feels as though the writers couldn't often figure out how to keep the story interesting without throwing in a random plot twist here or there, and more often than not, that results in certain scenes in the middle act of the film coming across as storytelling conveniences, rather than something that would naturally happen in the real world. But in the end, I did enjoy my time watching this, and certainly more than I expected to. Greenland isn't afraid to be darker and more cynical when thinking about how society would react in the face of extinction, but on the other hand, it also knows how to engage its audience with thrills and appeals to emotion. It feels oddly more appropriate for the time we're living now rather than if it came out a few years ago. Give this one a shot on VOD platforms like Vudu or Amazon Prime, for you might end up surprised just like I was. I am giving Greenland a B-. Up next we have Promising Young Woman. My thoughts on this one will not be long because I honestly feel ill-equipped to talk about a film that approaches the topic of sexual assault as brazenly as it does. And before you ask, no, Promising Young Woman never explicitly depicts a woman being raped on screen, but it deals with the ramifications of such a vile crime throughout its runtime, and writer-director Emerald Fennell sought to eschew this tough subject by giving us a darkly comedic revenge thriller. To be short of words, I found this film to be a fascinating and compelling, if perhaps problematic, piece of work. I'll get the problems out of the way first, in that its handling of the subject matter can be hit or miss for certain viewers, particularly with the implications of its divisive ending. Obviously, I can't really go into much detail there, but what I can say is that depending on how people feel regarding the topic, viewers may feel as though the way the main character goes about exacting revenge might not be entirely justified. Some of these scenes of Carey Mulligan's Cassie confronting her predators or others about their poor behavior also felt out of place with the overall tone tone the movie was going for. And again, that ending is a doozy, although it's not necessarily a bad one. That being said, I otherwise really enjoyed my time with Promising Young Woman. Much of this has to do with Carey Mulligan's superb work in the lead role, whose keen attention to the emotional power and intensity of her character had me hooked into the film for its entire runtime. I may not have always agreed with her character's choices or how the story presented them, but Mulligan still made me side with her in the end, since she is depicted as a damaged person with righteous fury and goes about resolving that anger with a fascinatingly unsteady moral compass. It makes her feel more like a real human being rather than some untouchable figure of purity. Mulligan's excellence in the lead role is also helped by the fact that her supporting performers, particularly Bo Burnham, in an inspired casting choice, and also that the film looks and sounds great. The choices made with the camera work, color grading, and soundtrack lend the film an aura of fun, while not distracting the sinister context behind the story. As a whole, I won't deny that this will be one of the year's most divisive movies, but it sure earned its right to be through the will of its stunning filmmaking and great performances. I give Promising Young Woman a B. And now we have the runner-up for the best movie of the holidays, News of the World. Here we have a film that is much less audacious and distinctive than the one I just talked about, playing it safe in a genre that has been well worn by Hollywood after many decades. But even so, News of the World worked a little bit better for me overall, since it succeeds more often through its simpler and more understated story. Director Paul Greengrass, who previously directed 3 of the films in the Bourne franchise, along with United 93 and Captain Phillips, made a film that feels much different in terms of pacing and direction from his previous work, yet still managed to make a western worth watching. I suppose the easiest thing I could compare it to is something like The Last of Us, except that would be a stretch considering that News of the World is much less violent, vulgar, and depressing. I only make the comparison because on the surface level it has a similar story, that being an older widower, played by Tom Hanks in this case, escorting a young orphan girl across treacherous terrain. That's pretty much where the similarities end though, because this is otherwise a pretty relaxed and traditional feeling western, complete with steady wide shots and a methodical sense of pace that is toned down from the more intense work Paul Greengrass has previously put out. Both my dad and I enjoyed the film despite its lack of a unique flavor though, for it is just a pleasant, enjoyable experience that was executed well by the cast and crew. This goes beyond the performances, which are good for the most part, especially from Tom Hanks and his much younger screen counterpart Helena Zengel, but more than that, I miss getting movies like this that feel as though they weren't made with a modern audience in mind. As much as I appreciate art that comments on the here and now, it's refreshing to escape into a time separate from my own and simply get wrapped up in the story being told to the viewer, which of course is helped by the authenticity by which post-Civil War Texas is brought to life on screen. On that note too, it was also interesting that the filmmakers were bold enough to tell the story from the perspective of people who fought for the Confederate Army and lost. The simple idea of presenting things from the viewpoint of those stuck on the wrong side of history might seem like blasphemy to Twitter, but News of the World found a way to make its characters sympathetic to the audience without having to excuse such things as racism and slavery. Hearing stories of post-war Texas and the antebellum South are rare, so I appreciated that this film provided a glimpse at the experiences of those who were trying to move on from their mournful, pain-ridden past. Even if you separate this film from its historical context and themes though, it is definitely worth checking out. And hey, if you aren't comfortable with going to a theater to see it, at least you'll be able to catch it at home when it premieres on VOD within a couple of days. I give News of the World a B. And last but not least, we have Pixar's Soul, my favorite movie of the ones I've discussed in this video. After being so disappointed by Onward, I am so glad we got another good original film from Pixar. Now, when I reviewed Wolfwalkers a few weeks ago though, I had mentioned that I wasn't sure if Soul would overtake it as my favorite animated film of 2020. And I am here to say that that isn't the case, for after having seen Soul, I would still say that I still like Wolfwalkers more. Throughout the past year, I've come to realize that I will always appreciate simplicity done well, and I value ambition more if it can be realized in a cohesive way. As far as Soul is concerned, I think veteran Pixar storyteller Pete Docter pulled off his vision well enough. I absolutely loved the concept going into this thing, even if it seemed more like an existential and philosophical repeat of Inside Out, and that concept was executed gracefully through its examination of the main character Joe Gardner. Voiced wonderfully by Jamie Foxx, he is a middle-aged band teacher who is stuck in a rut of complacency and unrealized passions, only to confront the terrifying reality of death when he falls down a manhole on the day his dream finally gets realized. What proceeds from there is he takes a journey with a wayward soul simply known as 22, who is voiced by Tina Fey. The two of them agree to help each other find their purpose and return to their rightful place, proceeding into an adventure that fits right into the Pixar template. In this, the thing that disappoints me about Soul is that its story very much works in the same way that other Pixar films do, in that two polar opposites are forced into the same situation together, and as they reluctantly agree to help each other get what they want, they develop a deeper bond. This makes it especially similar to Inside Out in that the central duo's dichotomy causes at least one of the characters to learn profound lessons about life. And with all of that being said, when it comes down to basic plot structure and story beats, Soul felt predictable with how it gets to those moments, and then what happens as a result of those story threads. I don't want to focus too much on that though, because I otherwise really appreciated what Soul had to say about the human experience. In a way, it kind of feels like Pete Docter made his own version of It's a Wonderful Life due to the conclusions the film so beautifully makes about life via the things Joe Gardner and 22 go through in the story. While Soul may not be as emotionally satisfying as that film, or other Pixar films for that matter, it accomplishes a lot with what it has to say through appeals to philosophy and thinking about our purpose in life. This is complemented by the film's refreshing commitment to respecting cultural heritage that is consistent with what we saw in Coco, along with the fantastic animation and music that enhance the storytelling. On top of that, the film is as funny as it is thought-provoking, particularly in how it uses cutaway gags when 22 talks about the souls of historical figures she has encountered. I greatly appreciated this film as a work of popular entertainment, but also as a heartfelt exploration into the human spirit, both literally and conceptually. Now you may be wondering how it fits into my ranking of the other Pixar films since I had ranked them all back in June. For now, I would say that it sits smack dab in the middle of my ranking, just barely edging out Finding Nemo, but not quite exceeding Toy Story 3. That could change with repeat viewings though, for my guess is that I could grow to like it more over time. What matters for now is that I really liked this film, and is the best film out of the major ones that released around Christmas time, and I would happily give it a B+. And that's it! I still have more movies to watch and review before I'm ready to make my top 10 best, worst, surprising, and disappointing movies of 2020 lists, but I hope this video will at least help you make some wise choices for entertainment for the time being. If you liked what you saw here, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and join the notification squadron so that you do not miss out on my future videos. Thank you for watching, and have a great one!